The night I stopped reacting, she threw a wine glass at the wall 6 inches from my head, and then stared at me like I had ruined the scene. That's the part I still think about. Not the crash, not the red wine sliding down the paint like blood in a cheap movie. Just her face after. She looked confused, almost disappointed, like I had missed a line I was supposed to say. A year earlier, if that glass had shattered beside me, I would have yelled. I would have asked her what the hell was wrong with her, and she would have cried, and somehow by midnight I'd be apologizing for my tone while sweeping up the mess she made. That night, I just looked at the wall, then at her, and said, "You should clean that before it stains." It was so quiet after that, I could hear our neighbor's TV through the vent. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's all you have to say," I shrugged. "I'm tired, Jenna." I walked past her, got a towel from the kitchen, set it on the counter, and went to bed. I didn't know it then, but that was the exact moment things started falling apart fast enough for me to finally see them clearly. Jenna and I had been together 6 years, married for 2. People loved her immediately. She had that bright, quick kind of charm that made waiters bring extra bread, and strangers tell her their life story in checkout lines. When we first started dating, I thought being around her felt like standing too close to a bonfire. Warm, exciting, a little dangerous in a way that made ordinary life feel boring by comparison. There were signs early on, but that's the thing about signs. They only become signs later. At the beginning, I thought our fights meant passion. Jenna thought everything intensely. She loved intensely, planned intensely, got offended intensely. If I was 10 minutes late, it wasn't annoying, it was disrespectful. If I forgot to text back during a meeting, it wasn't an oversight, it was me making her feel invisible. I spent years trying to stay one step ahead of her moods, like that was what devotion looked like. Then around spring last year something shifted. It wasn't sudden, more like a draft in a house you can't locate. She started picking fights over things that didn't make sense. I folded towels wrong. I chewed too loud. I used the wrong emoji replying to her Instagram story. One night she asked who Kayla from marketing was, and when I reminded her she'd met Kayla twice at company dinners, she accused me of being defensive. "You always do that," she said. "Do what? Make me sound crazy." I was standing there holding a bag of takeout, still in my work shoes, wondering how I'd gone from picking up her favorite Thai food to being cross-examined in my own kitchen. At first I thought she was stressed. Her job was a mess. Her mum was calling more than usual. She complained about being tired, about feeling stuck, about turning 30 and not knowing if this was her life. I tried to help. I took on more around the apartment. I surprised her with weekend plans. I listened. Or at least I thought I did. But every effort seemed to irritate her more. If I asked what was wrong, she said I was smothering her. If I backed off, I was cold. If I joked to lighten the mood, I was dismissive. If I stayed serious, I was making everything heavy. There was this one Tuesday I remember, because it was so stupid it should have snapped me awake. She called me while I was driving home and asked if I could stop for almond milk. I said sure. I got the exact brand she liked, unsweetened vanilla. When I came in, she looked at the carton and said, "You got the one with the blue cap?" I said, "That's the one you use." She laughed, but not in a funny way. "No, I use the green one. You've literally asked me for this one before." Then she just stared at me and said, "It's actually scary how committed you are to being right all the time." Over milk. I remember standing there with my keys still in my hand, feeling something inside me slow down. Not anger, just fatigue, a kind of emotional muscle failure. After that, I started noticing the pattern instead of getting pulled into it. The fights usually happened for one of 3 reasons: when I was about to ask where she'd been, when she came home in a weirdly good mood after being distant all day, or when her phone buzzed and she looked at it face down. That phone became part of her body, in the shower, on the sink, sleeping, under her pillow. She changed the passcode, which didn't matter, because I'd never been the guy who checked. I actually used to feel proud of that. Like trust was something noble and solid. Then one Friday she came home at almost 1 in the morning, wearing heels she definitely had not gone to work in. I was on the couch with the lights off. She jumped when she saw me. "Why are you sitting in the dark? Couldn't sleep." She put her purse down carefully. Too carefully. "You could have texted." "I did." She pulled out her phone, looked at the screen, then locked it again. "Must not have gone through." I nodded like that made sense. She waited. I could feel her waiting for the accusation, the raised voice, the questions. Instead I said, "I'm going to bed." That was the first time I saw panic flicker across her face. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was inconvenience. From there, the whole thing became almost clinical to me. I hate saying that because it sounds cold, but I was exhausted in a way that made emotion feel expensive. I started answering her chaos with one sentence, sometimes two. I stopped defending myself against things that weren't true. I stopped asking where she was going when she got dressed up to get air. I stopped chasing her from room to room when she muttered, "Forget it." And the stranger she became in those weeks was uglier than I expected. Without my reactions, she had to push harder. She started insulting me directly. Not vague complaints, precise hits. "You gotten boring. Do you even care that I'm unhappy? I swear, talking to you is like talking to furniture." Some of it landed because it was meant to. Some of it bounced off because I'd heard too much by then. One night she said, "Most women would have left already." I looked up from my laptop and said, "Then leave, if that's what you want." She went completely still. That sentence sat between us like a lit match. She didn't leave. Not that night. Instead, 2 days later, she became strangely sweet. Too sweet. She made coffee in the morning and asked about my meeting schedule. She kissed my cheek before work. She texted me, "Hope your day's going okay," which she hadn't done in weeks. If I hadn't already been paying attention, it would have worked. That evening, she left her Apple Watch charging in the bathroom. I wasn't snooping. I was brushing my teeth when it lit up. A message preview flashed across the screen. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You looked so good when you finally relaxed." No name, just a number. I stared at it long enough for the screen to go black. Then it lit up again. "He's suspicious." I actually laughed. Just once. Small, ugly, out through my nose. When Jenna came out of the bedroom, toweling her hair, she saw the watch in my hand and froze so fast it was almost cartoonish. "What are you doing with that?" I set it on the counter. Your watch lit up. She looked from my face to the screen. "So you're going through my stuff now?" There it was. The pivot. Immediate. Clean. Practiced. 6 months earlier I would have taken that bait and spent the next hour explaining that no, technically, I wasn't going through her stuff. And yes, I respected her privacy, and no, I wasn't controlling. But by then I was too tired to volunteer for my own manipulation, so I said, "Okay," she frowned. "Okay, what?" "Okay, if that's the version you want. What does that even mean?" "It means I'm not doing this with you." Then I walked away. She followed me into the living room. "So you're just going to act superior? You see one message and suddenly you know everything?" I sat down on the couch. "No. I know enough." "Enough for what?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. Wet hair, bare feet, anger already arranged across her face because anger had been useful for so long. And beneath it, for just a second, I saw fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing control of the story. "For tomorrow," I said. She didn't sleep much that night. Neither did I. I heard her pacing. Drawer sounds. The soft zip of a bag. Around 4 in the morning, the apartment got quiet. At 6:30, she was dressed. "Where are you going?" she asked me, which would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. "To a lawyer." That finally broke her. Not into sorrow. Into rage. She started crying and yelling at the same time, saying I was unbelievable, that I'd emotionally abandoned her for months, that she'd felt lonely, that if I'd paid attention, maybe she wouldn't have had to find comfort somewhere else. She threw everything at the wall to see what would stick. Marriage problems, my long work hours, my coldness, my failure to fight for us. And that was when I understood what all those months had really been. She had been trying to build a case, not for me, for herself. If she could provoke me enough, if she could get me to scream back, say cruel things, grab my keys and storm out, then she wouldn't be the woman who cheated. We'd just be another toxic couple who destroyed each other. Nice and blurry, shared blame, easier to live with. I remember saying very calmly, "You don't get to do this in reverse." She stopped mid-sentence. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and added, "You made your choices in the order you made them." I left before she could answer. The lawyer part was real. So was the separation. What surprised me was how quickly Jenna's tone changed when she realized I wasn't going to perform. No giant showdown, no begging, no war on social media. She actually seemed offended by my restraint, like dignity was a personal insult. A week later she asked if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop because neither of us wanted to give the apartment meaning anymore. She looked smaller somehow, less polished. She stirred her drink for almost a full minute before speaking. "I did care about you," she said. I nodded. "I know. I wasn't trying to hurt you. That one almost got me, not because I believed it, but because she seemed to need me to. I said, you were trying not to feel like the bad person. That's different." She looked down at the table and whispered, "Maybe." That was the closest I ever got to the truth from her. The man was someone from her gym. Married too, of course. Very intense, very misunderstood, probably allergic to accountability. It lasted just long enough to help her burn down her life, and then disappeared exactly the way people like that always do when the wreckage becomes inconvenient. By the time our divorce was final, he was gone. I only know that because Jenna called me one night, months later, crying so hard I could barely understand her. I let it ring. Then I turned the phone face down and went back to eating dinner. That sounds harsh, but it didn't feel harsh. It felt finished. People think power in a cheating story comes from exposing everything, or getting revenge, or saying the one perfect line that leaves the other person speechless. Maybe sometimes it does, but that's not what changed my life. What changed everything was realizing how much of myself I'd been handing over every time I reacted on command. The moment I stopped doing that, the whole performance collapsed. She didn't lose me when she cheated. She lost me when I stopped helping her pretend it was my job to explain her behavior. And I think on some level, that was the part she never expected. Not the divorce, not the silence, just the fact that I finally saw her clearly and didn't argue with what I saw.